much. Yeah, I'm Andrew Rummer. Actually spent most of my career in traditional financial journalism. More recently worked for a few startups. My most recent job was at The Block, deep in crypto journalism, and then as of last month, I'm now working for Digital Frontier. You won't have heard of Digital Frontier because we don't launch until December, but it's an exciting new UK-based tech publication. We're going to write about a broader suite of topics than just blockchain and crypto, but it will be, a decent sprinkling of what we cover. So look out for us nearer to launch. So to kick us off, maybe you could all introduce yourselves briefly. Eduard, you've already had 5 minutes, but if you want to go again, or okay, maybe just the rest of you, and also to kind of break the ice, kick us off. Tell us about your product, and as a kind of icebreaker question, tell us about what's exciting you about DeFi in Asia at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So my name's this one.
Yeah.
So my name's Ken. I work at a company called Pendle. We are a DeFi application that provides fixed rates markets in DeFi. So we provide support for underlying assets such as staked ETH, real world assets, and other yield bearing DeFi assets. And basically it works similar to interest rate swaps or the fixed and floating rate market. I lead the institutional business, so I focus on prop funds, professional capital allocators, anyone with any entity with size looking to deploy yield strategies on Pendle. Before this, I was also in traditional finance. I was in JP Morgan and had been banking for about 7 years. Now been in crypto for about since 2018.
And what are you most excited about in DeFi in Asia?
I think Asia specifically is quite interesting. So anecdotally, I speak to a lot of different institutions globally, and what I find in Asia is that they tend to be quite DeFi native in general, and tend to be on the forefront of to be the first mover. And I think that sense of demand and innovation, or demand for innovation, helps us to be inspired to do what we're doing and continue to innovate more for our client base.
Okay.
Hey everyone, I'm Jane, one of the co-founders for zkLend. And zkLend is a permissionless, or it's a lending project that is built on an L2 called StartBet. And really what we focus on are two products. A permissionless solution where users are able to connect their wallet, deposit digital assets, and they're able to earn a yield seamlessly. And the other product that we have is zkLend Institutional. And here we focus on helping institutional borrowers get access to retail or other institutional lenders. And there will be a KYC element on the zkLend Institutional product. So here we really are targeting two types of users, one on the retail side and the other on the institutional and retail KYC side. A little bit of background about myself. Actually, like Ken, I worked in banking for a bit, not as long as he did, but I used to work at Credit Suisse. And then I joined the startup world working at Deliveroo as the chief of staff of the Hong Kong office. So, joining this DeFi space, this blockchain crypto space has been really marrying the best of both worlds, being able to leverage a lot of my financial knowledge from my 2-year stint in banking, as well as being able to feel the boots on the ground environment and really being able to execute on some of the ideas that I have. In terms of what I'm most excited about in Asia Pacific, I guess this is an easy one for me, and it really revolves around tech talent. The abundance of tech talent that I do see in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia across Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, and I guess to an extent even Singapore, even though it's a small place, it really creates a very fertile environment for both entrepreneurship as well as entrepreneurs looking to expand and be able to scale and build their products quickly.
Awesome. I want to start with a question for Ken. So your product is about yield optimization. So how do you attract users? What are users coming to your product for?
Yeah, I think we provide a very specific use case in DeFi, which is the ability to lock a fixed rate for a fixed term. And that is something that is very, very new, I would say, in DeFi, where all the rates currently, they're floating, they depend on utilization and demand and so forth. The way that we do it is very similar to interest rate swaps, where there's basically a market for fixed rates and a market for floating rates. The demand, I would say, comes from two main users, so two types of users. So it comes from retail and also obviously on institutional users. On the retail side, I think it is a way for them to lock in a good amount. For example, if you look at ETH LSDs, that's been taking off a lot in the first half of this year. Early adopters are able to secure those fixed rates for up to maturity, and we have pools, 1 to 5 years down the line, and it's essentially developing Ethereum staking yield curve over time. With institutional clients, there is an element of that as well to secure fixed rates, but also more interesting opportunities around trading yield. So if yields are at a low level and they think that it should go back to the upper range, there is an opportunity for that as well. In terms of what's driving the demand, so I think getting access to our product in an easy way is going to be paramount, because DeFi itself, you talked about account abstraction. There's a lot of DeFi ops and things that you need to do. What we've done recently is with our front end called Unearth for, retail and simple to use fixed rate products, is to plug into exchanges and wallets. Most recently, we announced a partnership with OKX, where OKX wallets are able to basically get our fixed rates directly on Pendle. And similarly for institutions, it's basically making sure that we have the right tools for them to access.
Eduard, I want to dig more into this adoption thing with you a little bit. Thinking particularly about geographies, like what are the barriers out there to people from different geographies coming into this space?
Sure. So maybe I'll bring a couple data points, which is, in the financial world, what's the connection between Japanese housewives and Indian traders living in Mumbai? So not many people know that about 28% of the forex market worldwide is actually run by Japanese wives from their homes. That's actually about $87 trillion in yearly volume. So that tells you a lot how these Asian markets can actually drive the entire financial system. It's actually, bonkers if you think about it. Most people don't know that actually the largest derivatives market in the world is in India, is in Mumbai. So Mumbai has the largest derivatives trading community worldwide, and the largest volume and largest amount of traded contracts overall. So, you can take also especially like reports on crypto adoption. You're always going to see that places like Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on are always at the top of the list. And the fact is, we all know that most of centralized exchanges in crypto have always been, headquartered or founded from Asia. So if you take all of these data points, it really reveals how important and how big the opportunity is in terms of trying to onboard users from all of these countries onto DeFi in general, and how we can actually provide value back to them, and they can provide provide value back to the ecosystem. So in terms of onboarding, obviously each country and each region is very specific in the ways they want to onboard, and there are reasons for onboarding, right? Somewhere outside of Asia, like Turkey, they're looking more at hedging their forex risk, whereas somewhere like Japan, they're looking more at managing their household finances and taking some kind of risk trades on their day-to-day basis. But in terms of onboarding, we found that until now, most of the DeFi experience was really too difficult for them, right? You need to use a bridge, you need to use a fiat on-ramp to a centralized exchange, you need to withdraw to DeFi, then you need to use a bridge, connect the wallet, and then somehow finally at the end of the cycle, if the person hasn't decided to jump out of the window, they can finally use a DeFi platform. So all of these has to be removed away. And when you try to do that, you realize that, okay, you need fiat on-ramps. Well, you need to work with local partners that are going to enable you that fiat on-ramp. And most people think, okay, that should be easy. Yes, it is easy, but actually off-ramping your profits back to the real world, that's the hardest part in terms of what we have faced. And that's when all the KYC requirements kick in and so on, which is obviously a barrier in terms of a DeFi, being a DeFi project and an open source protocol. And the other is how you actually deal with these partners if you're a DAO. That's also a difficulty. So there's still a lot of barriers and hoops that you need to loop and bridge. But the most basic one that we're actually really surprised that most projects are not doing is translating every single content they do into the local language. Having moderators and customer service in the different languages. Having all of their channels in the local languages. And most projects don't do that. And you see DeFi projects that have massive treasuries that they could actually be doing that and they don't actually care. So that's really surprising from our perspective because we think it's a very easy thing to do. Low cost, efficient, and it's the best way to actually, basically speak to the user in their own language. And then try to understand them, see what their pain point, and then onboard them. And we see a lot of DeFi projects that are actually not tackling that, even though they do have the resources to do it.
I'd like to bring Jane in there. I mean, Edward was talking about the pains of user experience in DeFi, and I saw Ken nodding along with what he's saying. So how is zkLend, how are you trying to tackle that pain around user experience and make it easier for people to get into this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I think of it in 3 ways. First, it's just the difficulty of navigating the blockchain, right? Anyone who's used Ethereum, who's done any kind of transaction knows that gas fees can get extremely high and transaction fees are super low sometimes. And the reality for that is when we are building a lending protocol, we need to make sure that the foundation and the infrastructure that we're leveraging actually provides a strong user experience, even if we're not the guys building the infrastructure. So we want to pick the foundational pieces that are going to be helpful for users. So starting out, that's why we decided to build on a layer 2 solution called StarkNet, because we knew that utilizing zk rollups, they're going to provide fast transaction speed, low cost, and they're going to embed things like account abstraction, native account abstraction, which makes for a much stronger user experience. Just a side note for those of you who don't know what account abstraction is, it's basically a smart contract wallet that allows users or wallets to configure the way you interact with protocols. So what I mean by this is, instead of paying for gas natively in ETH, you may be able to do so in USDC, for example, or the protocol itself can actually subsidize gas for you. Or if you lost your seed phrase may no longer exist, so that you can actually choose people who could help you recover your wallet down the line. Because it's ironic, right? You keep a seed phrase away from a computer and a paper or in a piece of metal somewhere, physically somewhere, and the whole point of blockchain digitized things is to ultimately keep a piece of paper somewhere in your closet. That's super counterintuitive. So that's the first side of things. I think the second bit is going to be around the product itself. So is there a product market fit for what we're building, right? For us, we're building a lending protocol. Pretty straightforward. You deposit digital assets and you earn a yield on it. It's a P2P pool model. But products like Pendle and zkX with perps, they're huge markets for both. So for us, it's really thinking around the design of products. There's obviously a lot more financial products, especially on the fixed income side, that whose surface is just being scratched right now. So for us, it's thinking about, can we, even if we don't reinvent the wheel, can we bring some of these TradFi products into DeFi? And if not, can we innovate within the world of DeFi? And the third approach is around, the user experience itself. And what I mean by this is, no matter how simple your product is, ultimately if the front end is extremely difficult to navigate, no one's gonna get it. So I'm gonna give Pendle a big shout here because I'm a user of their product. And it took me a while to wrap my head around it. But they wrote these user guides on their front end that was just so incredibly useful for me to navigate. And it doesn't matter how complex or how simple your product is. What it distills down to is, if you don't have a strong user interface for people to connect their wallets, to read their balances, no one's gonna use it. And so, as a founder, one of the biggest things I've learned is, it's great that your tech teams write really great smart contracts and stuff, but you also need a very strong design and UX UI team to help you get the users who actually use them. So that's kind of the way I think about it.
I want to dig a bit more into the zero knowledge and the zero knowledge technology. So Jane and Edward, both your companies have zk in the name, so presumably it's quite important to you. What does this technology enable you to do that you couldn't do otherwise without the zk aspect of it?
Do you want to start?
Sure.
Yeah.
So our first approach was, how do we decentralize the order book? And it's kind of a utopia, right, in crypto. Many people have tried, many people have failed. And for us, the main problem is how you scale arbitrary computation, how you enable any network of nodes to actually talk to each other, take the orders in, process them as fast as possible, verify them, bring them back on chain. This sounds very simple, but it's actually very difficult on a practical level. And once you think about that problem, you realize that zk proofs gives you the ability to at least verify what's happening and settle that on chain back to L1. So it gives you an inherent connection to the security and scalability and, let's say, the overall decentralization of Ethereum, and inherit some of those properties all the way back up to your own application. So this, in very simple terms, it's an advantage that zk's can give you, as well as the verification of the computation. So that's something that we're looking at in the future, is how we can integrate zk into the component of the order book, both to verify what's happening within the order book, give transparency and security to the user. As you know, many projects until now, they either have a black box of an order book that's sitting on Amazon Web Services, and they're potentially selling the order flow, which means they're actually monetizing your trades again and potentially trading against you in many cases. So having zk kind of allows you to bring that additional layer of security verification around that. Now, there's usually a lot of confusion around what zk means. Some people think zk is around privacy, and in reality, the zk implementations we see today within rollouts, they don't actually have inherently any privacy. And I think that's an important distinction to make. So zk as a privacy tool will be very useful in the future for order books as well. So you can actually allow a certain degree of privacy in the transactions amongst users, right? So as more and more regulation is coming in, as more and more pressure is coming in the ecosystem, we see that there may be benefits towards giving the user some privacy towards, the ability of transaction amongst each other. As well as, that gives also something that, as you probably both know and probably can know better than me actually, is the fact that, institutions actually love dark pools and they love the ability to trade, with some degree of privacy. So it works both for users and institutions. So zk as a privacy tool is one thing, and zk as a scalability tool and as a proofing system of computation is another aspect. So I think these two distinctions will be important to talk.
Do you have anything to add, Jane?
Tough to add to that. Yeah, maybe I'll just talk a little bit more about use cases of zk. As Edward mentioned, one is on scalability and one is on privacy. On the scalability front, obviously all the transactions are being matched into one single proof that can then be validated on Ethereum layer 1. But the thing is, zk proofs isn't something that's exclusive to blockchain. It's actually something that's existed since I think the 70s. And in fact, the founder of Starkware was actually a researcher in this field before he even went into blockchain. The whole point is, I want to be able to prove something to you without telling you the secret. So I want to be able to go to the gym and have told you or proven to you that I've gone to the gym without showing you photos of myself working out. This is something that maybe is personal to me and I don't want to give it away. And so, back to my point around scaling, I can batch all these transactions, but I can actually verify this proof. The computation of the proof might actually take a lot of time and might take a lot of resources, but ultimately you can verify this proof easily across any blockchain. And it doesn't necessarily need to be on layer 1, it can be on an alt layer 1, or it can be on another layer 2. So the point is, it creates a lot of composability across different blockchains. zk rollups isn't something that needs to exclusively live on L2. It can be something that works interoperably between layer 1s and layer 2s. And the second point I want to add on the privacy bit is, Edward touched on private transactions and things like that. But for us, what I'm personally very excited about is on zk identity. So not only about what goes into my transaction and you not finding out, but if I needed to KYC someone, do I really want everything, including their passport photo, where they're born, what their birth dates are? I don't want to disclose this information to Ken, for example, but I want to tell Ken that I'm of age, let's just say. Can we leverage such zk identity solutions on a protocol level so that we can verify things without blindly trusting? So that's another part of zk that I'm extremely excited about.
Let's stick with the tech theme for a bit, and I'll bring in Ken. what technology are you most excited about at the moment? Is it zk or is it something else?
Yeah, I think apart from zk, and I don't want to, I feel like we're different already, I talk so much about zk. So we are, as a fixed rate platform, we're looking very actively at sustainable sources of yields. So right now we're looking at ETH staking yields, we're looking at yields from perp trading protocols, for example, from RWAs and all these different sources. One interesting development that we're keeping a very close eye on is on the concept of ETH restaking, specifically with EigenLayer. Basically, ETH staking 101, you would put a certain amount of ETH in order to secure the Ethereum blockchain, and in return you receive a yield from that. So one chain and one source of yield. With ETH restaking, you're taking that same amount of ETH and staking it on multiple blockchains and receiving multiple sources of yield. So I think this will be very interesting as we see ETH staking on its own become kind of foundational as a base, in a way risk-free rate in DeFi, and see more permutations on that.
Another thing in this tech space, I just want to come back to Jane, there's this tension, well, terms that you hear a lot are permissioned and permissionless, and there's a tension between those two things. Like, how do you untangle that tension there?
Yeah, it's pretty tough, and I don't know if we are the guys who are gonna crack who decides to go permissionless or permission. But to summarize, permissionless basically means that anyone, I don't care who you are, will be able to access the protocol and be able to, whether it's trade, whether it's deposit, whatever you want to do, wherever you are in the world, you don't need to verify who you are. And that's the whole point of permissionless. The idea of permission is you basically have this gate out there that says, only if you fulfill certain criteria would you be able to interact with the protocol. Now, obviously, governments and people who are a bit more on the institutional side of things would favor the permission side, right? Because that's their way of making sure that there are no bad actors on the blockchain who could potentially utilize some of these protocols and actually use them as intermediaries. But I think ultimately it's not up to us as protocols to decide what should be permissionless and what should be permissioned. I think that's something that governments or maybe with time we'll see more clarity. But my role at zkLend is to provide growth products for whoever needs it. Really, if you want to be able to use your product permissionlessly and you want to interact with people who do the same, by all means, please go ahead and use our protocol. And in fact, that's why we created over-collateralized pools, because there's no kind of reputational risk when it comes to over-collateralized loans. On the other hand, though, if you are an institution and you do want to tap into borrowing pools, but you want to make sure whoever you're borrowing from is someone that you're comfortable with, then please do use zkLend Institutional. But I think, the point I'm trying to make here is just, I don't think we are in the role to decide, but I'm here to offer both options to people.
The final topic I want to explore is security. So I'm going to come back to Edward. Like, what things have to happen in the realm of security?
Why do you do this to me?
Well, I'm sorry. I'll open up to the others as well if you want to come in later. But it's obviously essential for user adoption that they feel safe. So how do you handle that?
So a couple of days ago, someone asked me a question about self-regulation. That was, I think, even harder to answer. So right now, within security, there's different ways you can think about it, right? One is the fact that right now, most users are interacting with smart contracts without knowing the risks they're taking. So you can think, okay, how will you tackle this problem, right? Is it going to be at the wallet level? The wallets need to provide some alerts and some, disclaimers. Maybe this contract is not audited. Maybe this contract has been hacked once or twice, or it has interacted with some risky wallets that are tied to scams. So all of these disclosures and alert systems probably will come very handy, at least for this first wave of users that are already using MetaMask and all of these other wallets out there. So that's one aspect. The other is that we don't have standards around auditing within the ecosystem, right? And we all know that some of these auditors, they're very big, their reputations are questionable, some are small and they have good reputations. but there's no really clear road to know, okay, this auditor is doing certain practices that are actually good or bad versus another auditor. So there's no set standards within the industry around auditing of smart contracts. And from our perspective, that is one of the low-hanging fruits for regulators. If you want to make sure that there's less impact towards the user in terms of loss of funds, scams, and hacks, you should probably want to enforce that any smart contract that's going on chain is actually audited by some licensed auditing partner. So we think that that kind of mechanism will be very interesting, that countries actually force to say, okay, you can deploy any smart contract you want on chain, but you need to actually audit it first with this list of accepted auditing firms that actually pass through certain licenses and certain best practices requirements. So we think that that kind of system will be an interesting idea in general. But it's always kind of the challenge, right? How do you approach security? And not always we're doing a good job collectively. So yeah, I don't know. You probably have some interesting thoughts around that.
Yeah, do either of you have anything to add?
I think what I can share from our perspective, we take, I would say, considerable more smart contract risk, and the reason why that is because we are creating a derivative asset on top of an underlying asset, for example, Lido Stake ETH. And therefore, we are very aware that security is very, very important to us and obviously for our users. Because of that, we have a panel of actually 6 different auditors for different use cases. And every single pool that exists on Pendle and new pools, upcoming pools, are all audited before going live. So that's on the protocol level. I think on the, I guess as a user myself, it's challenging to keep up as well because security in DeFi is constantly a moving target. There's always new exploits, new ways to do things. And I think one thing I can share personally, I'm not affiliated to Rabby Wallet, but Rabby Wallet has been great in the sense that every single transaction, if you use MetaMask and you interact with like a contract, it spits out like a bunch of hacks. I have no idea what it means, but on Rabby Wallet it tells you what it means and like what you want to improve. So for me, that's a big value add.
Okay, what else? I think you guys have covered it all.
Being covered is good. Being covered. All right, so going to open it up to audience questions now.
Yes.
Who wants to go first?
Eduard, the interesting point around regulating auditors. Have you seen anyone, any country, any region doing that? And I guess a broader question for the panel: how do you interact, if at all, with the regulator, and what are some good interactions that you've had?
So far we haven't seen any regulator taking that approach. But we have seen something interesting that actually many people are not aware around the European regulatory framework. What the European Union decided was that fully decentralized smart contracts should not be regulated right now. And they actually defined the exact criteria at which point they think a smart contract is decentralized. And that's something that not many people are aware of. So they actually say if you have admin rights, you have control over a smart contract. There's upgradability of the smart contracts. So there's this different criteria that they set out in the legislation to define that, okay, you're actually a centralized smart contract, therefore you fall under our regulation. But if you're actually fully decentralized, not ungradable, you just deploy a smart contract on chain, they're actually not regulating you. So any protocol that is fully decentralized can actually live on chain right now within the EU parameters, and it will not be regulated for the time being. So I think that's some interesting bit of information that kind of reveals you that regulators are actually looking into DeFi and they're actually interested in the trade-offs between decentralization and centralization, and they're actually trying to make an effort to see what's the best step moving forward. So I think that small detail sometimes is overlooked, and I'm sure in terms of even Hong Kong, you probably have some very interesting things to cover there.
So we are on the side of more decentralized protocol, and therefore we are on the side of being self-regulated rather than being regulated explicitly. And what that means is what we have done, what we are considering as well, is to implement things like geofencing from specific jurisdictions, sanctioned countries obviously, as well as to, I think it's just self-regulation.
Yeah, I just add to Ken's point, yeah, I think for now we are also self-regulating, and what that really means is to work with security companies, the likes of Chainalysis of the world, to just make sure that whoever's interacting with your protocol doesn't have a tainted wallet. But I think the broader picture about Hong Kong, which is quite interesting because I'm based there, is, you know, there's a lot of talk about like Asia, Hong Kong being like an open crypto hub, and I certainly, like having lived there for the past few years, I certainly see that shift. But to be very honest, right now a lot of it is the government officials trying to understand what it really means, right? Like what it means for exchanges to be listing different types of instruments, not only spot, futures, what types of tokens they want to support, what types of activity us as a government, or how do we want to incubate these different types of, whether it's Web3 or exchange projects. I think when it comes to DeFi, it's still pretty early. You know, the government is more concerned with thinking about how to work with banks to tokenize assets, improve use cases. But I do think that until there is a large scale of DeFi projects operating in Hong Kong, I don't, and this is a slightly pessimistic view, I don't think regulation is really going to come into play just yet. So I think we'll just have to rely on self-regulation until then.
Do we have time for any more? Yeah.
For Jane, you're in Hong Kong. And so do you think Hong Kong regulations are basically a petri dish for what China might be considering in the future?
Personally, yes, I think so, because I don't think things can operate in Hong Kong without some form of blessing coming from mainland China. And what we do see is that a lot of the Chinese-speaking or Greater China-based VCs are operating out of Hong Kong and looking for teams and projects, whether it's like Chinese-speaking teams or like culturally, right? It's never like a clear line, like, is this a Chinese team or is this like a non-Chinese team, right? If you're operating out of Hong Kong, but maybe your team's background, they come from China, you know, I think there's a big draw into Hong Kong in that space. And so I think it's two shifts, right? One, on the government side, there's implicit blessing for them to be experimenting on this level. On the other side, you also see a lot of people moving into Hong Kong, and there's a lot more talent growing in that space, and not just local talent, but talent coming in from outside. Yeah.
I sound like CNN, but can I do a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So accordingly, do you also think that what's happening in America at the moment with its aggressive stance, Choke Point 2.0, on that, China's probably looking at it going, oh, here's an opportunity. America's not progressing, maybe we should.
Yes and no. I would say on the surface level, yes. No, because, you know, if you go too fast and too quickly and things blow up in your face, kind of like how things have done and with 3 Arrows and FTX, it is embarrassing for the governments who hosted them, right?
Yeah.
So to take on such a risk, to be like, hey, just because the US isn't supportive of crypto and the regulatory environment is extremely hostile, doesn't necessarily mean that China should be, you know, free for all for, I guess, blockchain companies.
Thank you.
Any more?
Yeah. So final question, I guess. Overall sentiment check of the crypto markets in Asia, because maybe more to Jane and Ken. What are you seeing in terms of, like, you know, we've been post FTX in the bear market. What are you seeing in terms of traction of crypto adoption in Asia?
Yeah, I mean, I was just telling the two of them, what I was quite surprised with is, you know, I went to ECC, which was in Europe, and then this is actually my first token 2049, and what I've realized is there's so much institutional interest, maybe by nature of the conference itself, but I think that in general, crypto payment rails is something that is, I would say, not as mainstream yet in Asia, and I am starting to see a lot more interest in this space. I would say previously when you think about off-ramping money in Asia, you would have to ask people, okay, so how do I off-ramp? What's like the easiest way to do so? But just in the conference alone, I've seen a lot of payment rail companies that are looking to promote. So that's an area that I was quite interested in, and I thought really stood out between like being in Asia and Europe.
I think DeFi, maybe more globally, not just in Asia, has been getting a lot more traction this year. Obviously, post the rise and fall of FTX and Celsius and BlockFi, the list goes on and on. DeFi has actually gained a lot of traction. In fact, in May this year, 20% of all trading volumes happen on decentralized venues versus centralized exchanges, and that's the highest it's ever been. And it's very interesting. So like new users to crypto, to DeFi in the last 12 to 24 months, more often than not, they're trading on Uniswap and GMX for spot perps instead of going to Binance and Coinbase, etc. And then more specific to Asia, I think, again, back to what I mentioned earlier, I think there's generally a sense of being early to opportunities, being the first mover in the space. That's what I've noticed about participants in Asia, specific to DeFi. So it's very refreshing, especially in this market. It's quite dry, I would say, and quite crabby, sideways markets, but at the same time, we still see some level of substantial demand. So that's very promising.
So just maybe to add a little bit like the landscape as we're seeing it right now. So within Korea, for example, obviously Terra was a big hit. So we're seeing a huge migration towards more like gaming. As you know, gaming is a big thing in those markets. So we're seeing a lot of projects that are trying to utilize gaming as the way to grow. And a lot of Web2 gaming companies going into Web3 in Korea. So they're using that avenue towards growing the ecosystem. And then you're seeing very specific localized approaches that are very differentiated. In Indonesia, the government, what they decided was, okay, let's lower the taxes below 1%, because most people who onboard in crypto in Indonesia, they don't have big ticket size, right? They don't have a lot of money to put into it, so they don't want to, they don't want to choke the ecosystem growth from very early on. But they paired that by actually licensing, regulating, and approving official exchanges backed by the government. So what's happening now is that all of the exchanges in Indonesia that existed until now, some are owned by Binance, some are independent. They're actually quite afraid because they see that the government themselves are actually sponsoring an official exchange. So that tells you a lot that they see that there's an opportunity towards creating more of a regulated environment for crypto that is captured in a way by the government and sanctioned officially. So as much as you have one official stock exchange, you're going to have one official crypto exchange. So that's a very interesting, different approach. And Thailand has a similar approach where you have the main banks investing in regulated crypto exchanges and kind of officially investing in Web3 projects and DeFi projects. So that's also quite interesting how open-minded they are as well, right? All of these institutions. But I think every country is very different, right? Korea is not the same as Indonesia, it's not the same as India. But you all see how the governments are actually quite open and institutions are driving adoption as well in the entire region. And I think that's one big difference, I would say, compared to Europe or compared to the US.
Brilliant. Well, that was a fun panel. Thank you very much. And thanks for the question.